Freight Efficiency with NACFI's Mike Roth and Friends.
In episode 26, I'm joined by Muffi Ghadiali, co-founder and CEO of Electriphi, where we talk about the difference between the charging needs of automobiles and commercial vehicles, the need for fleets and utilities to work together on charging solutions, fleets' need for an electric charging playbook, the factors that have to be considered for charging electric vehicles, the role of managed charging, and the importance of planning for charging before investing in electric trucks.
Today we have joining me Muffi Ghadiali, co-founder and CEO of Electriphi. Hello, Muffi. Happy to have you today. How are things going?
So far, so great, Mike, and always happy to chat with you at any time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. There's a lot going on with electric trucks and charging, and the expertise you're bringing is been kind of new to me personally, as well as a bit to NACFI. So this is going to be fun. But we call this Freight Efficiency with NACFI's Mike Roth and Friends, and Muffi, it's been short time, but we've become pretty good friends. So I always start this chat with one of us sharing when we became friends. Do you remember how we found one another?
Yeah, so we started Electriphi back in 2018, and even before we started the company, I was a subscriber of the NACFI newsletter, and so I had been following NACFI and you in particular for many months before that. And I was just looking through our emails yesterday. So my first email out to you as Electriphi, or rather pre-Electriphi when we were in stealth mode, was back in November 2018. And I think it went something like, hey, we're working on something cool on the electrification space and would love to get your feedback. And I remember showing you the demo of what we had at that time was a minimum viable product, sort of a proof of concept. And you said, this is super interesting. We need to feature you guys in the next NACFI report, which I think came out in March or April of 2019. So we were, and I still have a copy of the report. So we were featured there. We had screenshots, and you guys had a blurb. So it seems like not too long ago, but then sometimes it seems like really long ago.
Sure, it does. And we at NACFI, we're always looking for who's part of the industry already, making noise and bringing, good solutions. And then, of course, we get contacted quite often with, people, in stealth mode, as you said, with a good idea, trying to, find their way. And so we're always, putting our very first, filter or, trying to understand, is this something that's really going to be important to the industry or not? So maybe we got it right with you guys. So very good. So how did you get involved in trucking in particular? And, maybe what's your personal background, Muffi, that prepared you for what you're doing now?
Yeah, so my history prior to Electriphi, so I come from the EV space to some extent. I still have a 2013 Nissan Leaf, which I get about 50 miles of range on a good day. And so I've been in EV enthusiast for a while. And prior to Electriphi, I was at a company called ChargePoint. They're pretty famous now. So they are the largest EV consumer charging network. And the way I got involved into trucking was as fleets started to show up on the EV side of things, transit, heavy duty, medium duty, light duty, and even school buses. They were looking for something very different from an EV charging and a fueling standpoint. And to me, it was sort of an aha moment because, and having been through many sort of technology cycles, I've worked with companies like Hewlett Packard and Amazon and startups. You see certain patterns, and so one pattern is that consumer, there's a technology solution, and then as it evolves, it tends to bifurcate into a consumer solution and a commercial solution. And so I saw those signs early on where EV charging was a one size fits all. If you want a charger, and if you want a charging solution, here's what it is. This works for consumers and this works for commercial and enterprise. But when I started digging into trucking and just in enterprise charging, they wanted something completely different. For example, they didn't care about how big the charging network was. We don't care if you have 100,000 charging stations. Our fleets are going to charge. They all come back to this home base, and that's where they get serviced, maintained, and charged. And so it was a very different solution that they needed. So at the basic level, you could say, is just charging a vehicle. What's the big deal? And what I realized in talking to a lot of fleet customers, and actually in particularly with you guys as well, is yeah, it is a big deal. It's very, very different, and a consumer solution in most cases will not work as these fleets start to scale.
Yeah, it's kind of the classic, business to consumer, B2C versus B2B, right? So, I mean, that's the thing that's driven me in my career over 35 years now. I said I wasn't going to call my career anything older than 30. I was going to stay at over 30 for the next 20 years, but I have now said 35. So, and why I like trucking is because they make decisions based on true, facts and economics. And so, we do that a bit when we buy consumer goods, whether it's a car, an electric car or not. We do pay attention to the budget, but, trucking has taught me that they absolutely do. And so, how they charge, what they charge, how much, and how fast, all that's really key to being profitable, deploying electric trucks. So, yeah, I understand that a lot. So could you sort of paint a picture for us from your seat where, the industry is with electrification in trucking? I mean, are we well on our way, or are we kind of just starting? And I'm sure it matters what, by segment, but how are you seeing that market?
Yeah, so maybe I'll step back and give you a big picture of how we see this playing out. And as you pointed out, trucking and fleets in general have built entire operational systems that are highly and precisely fine-tuned to eke out every last bit of efficiency, either it's cost per mile or TCO or or whatever metric that you choose. And you see this whole massive industry segment of transportation in general that is being thrust towards electrification for all the obvious reasons, environmental reasons, operational cost reasons, and in terms of TCO and other benefits. But as they thrust towards electrification, some of the fundamentals are changing in the sense that now, as a fleet operator, I've been operating, say, a fleet for 20, 30 years, and my truck comes in, fuels diesel, and then goes into service maintenance, and you're done. Now, suddenly, as a fleet operator at scale, you have to worry about, when do I charge? How much do I charge? How fast do I charge? And all of these things, if they are not managed, they can become an incredible burden in terms of not just costs, but also a domino effect on fleet operations. So we have this one world that's moving towards electrification. On the other side, you have utilities who understand this really well. So they understand generation and distribution and capacity planning and rate design. They don't have a ton of insights into transportation because they've never had to deal with transportation as a load. So they see this as a huge opportunity, but they see it as a huge challenge as well. Is when are these vehicles going to show up on the grid? How much energy will they need? And also, where specifically are they going to show up on the grid? Like, a simple thing like, say a fleet operator is looking to transition their entire fleet of, say, 150 vehicles at a specific depot. The utility needs to know exactly where they're going to show up because you may not have that much transformer capacity. And so where we as Electriphi sit is we are right at the intersection of these two really large industry segments. And we are, in the most simplest way, we are trying to orchestrate this whole transition in the sense that help large fleets transition over to electric in a way that does not disrupt their operations, but also minimize the grid impact, or at least give the utility side enough runway to build out and scale the infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm chuckling inside a little bit because that's exactly our take on where we're at. One of the big realities that we have with electric trucking, and that is, again, this huge force of electric utilities, the people that generate and distribute the electricity that we use for so many things, right, from manufacturing to our homes to all kinds of things, and then the big transportation market. But they really never have had to work together. So they really know nothing about one another. And, Dave Schaller on my team always says it's like the middle school dance where everybody's looking around and no one wants to talk or dance because, they don't know how to talk to the other players. I mean, it sounds simple, but, it is a really big thing. And so, a lot of people are trying to work on that, including NACFI and others. But for you're absolutely right there, right? I mean, you have to be when these fleets, think about deploying electric trucks. Is that kind of how you sort of view it?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to steal that middle school dance analogy because that fits so perfectly. And here's what's happening, right? And just to give you a perspective of how complex this landscape is, right? In the US, you have 200 plus major utilities, and if you count everybody, it's 3,000 plus utilities, right? And each one of them have some form of an electrification plan, but they're all at different trajectories and different stages of maturity. And so a fleet that is deploying locally, one has to work with their utility to at least figure out exactly how they'll scale. And it gets even more complex for a fleet that's operating nationwide because you have to work across a variety of utilities, and they all may be on different trajectories in terms of, how they're creating incentives for electrification, how they are building the infrastructure out.
Just a quick note there, Muffi. I mean, we're working with some, very large national fleets, and the first thing they say is, well, we've been through one deployment at one depot. The second one's going a lot quicker and a lot better and easier. And then they seem to get to a point where they go, well, yeah, I spoke too fast. This one's a lot different than the first one. So, we will have lessons learned and learn from them from, one region of the country and you deploy in another region. But we can't be naive. They are going to be very different because of the things you're bringing up, I believe.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think one other thing, and we talk to fleet customers across a lot of segments. Trucking, light duty, medium duty, school buses, municipal transit. What a lot of these folks are looking for is, can you give us a playbook of how this has been done before? And so what we're beginning to do is we've created a set of services around just helping customers plan all the information that we can help them with even before any electric vehicle shows up or any infrastructure goes in the ground. And that helps them at least set a stage for this is what's going to happen when these vehicles show up. And one of the things I like to point out is things that NACFI does, like run on less. I think that's going to be a very interesting platform to create playbooks like these, based on real world metrics, real world data in terms of these are the trucks, this is the charging infrastructure, this is how it plays out in a real operation scenario, because it's going to take a lot of that and pilots across the country for folks to get enough confidence that, okay, now they're going to pull the trigger on bigger purchases, more infrastructure deployment, and have a smooth transition plan.
Yeah, I get it. I think it's important. It'll be very important to look for operations like your own. So if you're a fleet, do look for operations that are similar, how you operate the trucks, what sort of utility structure is in that area. And pick which deployments that are out there in the public domain, some of which will show and run on less electric this year. And then but be careful that you're following ones that are similar to you as a fleet, and then you can move fast. A mistake might be made if you assume, well, I'm going to do it like them, and then you find out they operate their trucks differently. They're in different regions of the country, and just some of those solutions just simply won't work. So, kind of classic, follow people similar to your own situation, and you'll be successful.
Yep, exactly. And we see this in every single day as we look at different types of fleets. So I mentioned the different segments we work with, and it comes down to the vehicle class size, battery size, charging infrastructure, duty cycles, weather conditions, driver behavior. So there's what's fascinating in these times is that we can instrument and collect data from everything, and that is one of the biggest advantages we have right now. Is we as an industry, we can leverage existing telematics data, for example, to exactly track how your existing vehicle will operate.
Yep.
And you can use that to model an electric vehicle.
Yeah. So let's get in the weeds on this a little bit. So what describe for us what exactly is managed charging, and how will it improve the profitability of fleets deploying electric trucks? So just to kind of take us through sort of the primer on managed charging.
Yeah, so and I'll build off the notion that I described earlier. Is we sit at the intersection of transportation and energy, and the managed charging platform essentially ties these two together in an operational way. So what we do is we look at how the fleet operates, when are the vehicles coming in, how much time do you have for them to charge, how much charge you need for the next run, and then we look at the utility side to see how the energy rates are changing. So as you can, as you've seen with your own residential or commercial utility bill, the cost of energy changes depending on when you charge. On the commercial side, it also depends a lot on how much you charge and how fast you charge. And so what managed charging essentially does is looks at all these parameters and focuses on two primary things. First is to make sure that every vehicle is charged and ready before it pulls out. And two, minimize the energy cost as much as possible without impacting your operations. And of course, I'm oversimplifying things in terms of how they work on a daily basis, but this is really the essence of managed charging. Now, what's really interesting, and as we've gone into deployments with a lot of customers across the US, one thing that stood out to us is the first two are a given, charged and ready at lowest cost. The third one, which has turned out to be super interesting for us, is the fact that we can help them charge more vehicles without an infrastructure upgrade. So what does that mean? When you look at a depot is served energy through a transformer. And so the transformer basically is, turns out to be the bottleneck long-term in terms of how much energy can be delivered to the depot and that energy being used to charge the vehicles. With managed charging, there's something that we can do that makes this a lot more scalable, is just by reducing the load and distributing the load, we can actually help customers charge more vehicles without the transformer upgrade happening. And we can do very sophisticated modeling where we can say, if you give us how your fleet operates, we can tell you within this transformer capacity, you can charge two or three times more vehicles without this transformer upgrade. And that's something, and we sort of backed into this with a couple of customers, and it turns out that that's even more compelling, because what happens is, as you can imagine, a transformer upgrade is not a trivial thing. A utility might take between 12 to 24 months to upgrade the transformer, because it's electrical switchgear. You need to go through permitting and sometimes a public hearing, and it's a process. And if we can help bridge customers through the scaling while that process is happening, it's turning out to be a huge deal.
That's fascinating, and I think really important. But my instinct says that then this is something that fleets should worry a little longer, a little farther down their journey. So, if I've got a site that has 50 trucks and I want to electrify one or two of them, do you find that they don't worry about managed charging in the early days when they've got one, two, or five trucks, and then they really need to consider it down the road when they're adding their 10th or 20th out of the 50, or do they really need to be doing it more early on? I mean, because these fleets have a lot to deal with as they're starting to deploy these trucks, and I'm just curious if there's a point in that journey that they should or need to look at managed charging. But is it something they can wait on a bit, or no?
So maybe I'll give you a specific example of how crazy this can get very quickly, right? So let's pick a heavy duty truck or a transit bus that's about 500 to 600 kilowatt hours of battery capacity, and it has to charge every single night, right? So vehicle comes in 8-9 p.m., charges for 8-9 hours. 500-600 kilowatt hours is roughly the amount of energy a single family home consumes in about a month and a half.
Yeah.
So even if you say I've got 3 heavy duty trucks, you're already pushing the limits of what a transformer capacity is going to serve, given the dwell times. And most folks don't quite grasp the amount of energy these vehicles actually need, because diesel and gasoline have been incredibly energy dense. That's one of the reasons why they are so popular as a fuel, is incredibly dense fuel. Electricity is different because electrons are generated and consumed almost on demand. So it creates even with a few trucks, it can create some very interesting problems. Part 2 of this is even if managed charging is not needed, say you got only 3 vehicles and you got enough capacity, and the energy rates are not as penalizing as they would be if you double the number of vehicles. What you still want to do is collect data as much as possible. I've got 5 trucks. I want to know exactly how they're operating, how efficient these vehicles are, how much of the battery capacity is actually being used in your fleet conditions. So for example, your weather conditions, your driver conditions, and also is the infrastructure sized correctly. So as part of our managed charging platform, we actually have a simpler mode where we call it unmanaged charging. And what we do in that mode is just simply collect data, and that can be used to give you guidance on what makes sense. So for example, you can start off with 3 trucks and 150 kilowatt chargers. And just looking at the data, we can tell you, well, actually, 150 kilowatts is overkill. You could be fine with a 75 kilowatt charger because your vehicles have a longer dwell time, or your energy rates are cheaper at some other time.
By getting involved early, with your first truck and so forth, it just forces the fleet to think about the operational changes they're going to want to make when they move to charging more trucks, because it'll just make that pathway quicker and easier. Because we now are going to be managing range. I mean, it's a new sort of operational management for trucks. I mean, we used to fill up, diesel and gasoline, they may fill up every day, but they fill for 2 or 3 days a run just by the nature of how dense the fuel is. What's your advice for fleets as they, they're starting to, they've decided, all right, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to start scaling electric trucks at one of my depots or whatever. What would be your top 3 things to think about and advise them once they're working with Electriphi?
I'd say my top 3 things would be planning, and planning. I mean, if you get the planning part of it right, everything is going to be smooth sailing. And this is where we've seen, successful as well as disastrous project is the more, thoughtfulness that goes into the planning phase saves a lot of downstream headaches and friction.
Yeah, get it right. The old ready, aim, fire, right?
Exactly.
Take your time getting ready. Take your time aiming. It sounds like include managed charging and all of that from day one. So Hey, Muffi, my friend, thank you very much for joining us. You bring a really interesting perspective to this whole subject, and look forward to working with you on Run on Less Electric and other projects going forward.
Always a pleasure, Mike. Take care.
Freight Efficiency with NACVI's Mike Roth and Friends.